I've said from day one and from my very first video that I want my channel to be a place for everyone. And while I always do a massive amount of research for all of my videos, the views expressed won't always be agreed on by everyone. And that's okay. And when that happens, I also want to be able to provide a platform for those voices to make sure that they don't feel as though they are going unheard. So when there was a comment on the Haunted United States Special Edition video discussing the 27 Club, I wanted to make sure that that person's viewpoint was addressed. They commented, "Okay, as a Gen Xer, I am here to tell you that you are clearly wrong about Cobain being our champion. By the time Nirvana was really loose, I was already in my 20s and working and such. Other Xers were older than me. I don't know one Xer that will state what you misspoke about us. You want influence on us, you have to look to the 80s music, not the 90s. When Teen Spirit came out, I was in college, and yes, I do remember it on MTV, but there's a big misconception about Nirvana you didn't touch, and that is how its birth crashed into other music boundaries, turning already existing music on its head, being certain genres of rock. This was always something Cobain wasn't accepting of, not only his message getting misinterpreted, since he became more and more withdrawn. You know that famous acoustic concert he did for, I can't remember. He was reportedly not speaking to anyone. It was the last live he did before passing, but I will tell you, grunge was not accepted and was short-lived. Thank God. The generation you're thinking of is After X, whatever it is. I'm not sure where you got that, but it's wrong. Hope you add a correction to this. T. First of all, I want to thank T for your insight, and I do always appreciate a differing opinion and a respectful debate. And while there are some accuracy to points that you've made, I'm going to have to, respectfully of course, disagree. So we're going to talk about it. Let's start simply. Who is Generation X? Generation X is anyone born between 1965 and 1979-1980, or at the time of recording this in 2022, those aged 41 to 56. As someone right on the cusp of Gen X, having been born in 1981, I was 13 years old, having turned 13 years old a mere matter of months after the death of Kurt Cobain in April of 1994. And I'm in the oldest age bracket of the category of generation that does come next, which is millennials. While the music of Nirvana continued to impact generations after his death, the Xers, which actually include Kurt Cobain himself, were old enough to buy the records and attend the concerts. And while there were Xers in college during that time, that does not remove them as being a target audience. Far from it. We are fortunate enough to have a wide variety of musical genres to meet the many varying tastes of individuals worldwide. There will be plenty of individuals in all age categories, not exclusive to Gen X, who will love the music of Nirvana and find themselves and their own voices within the lyrics of the band's songs. There will also be plenty of individuals in all age categories, not exclusive to Gen X, who weren't and aren't Nirvana fans, and find their music derivative and feel that it oversaturated the marketplace at the peak of their fame, and do feel that it negatively impacted other musicians at the time, and maybe still feel that way today. That's not an invalid feeling, but it also doesn't remove us from the facts. Just because any band is not a voice for you and your specific role in a generation does not mean that band is not considered influential as a broad snapshot of the generation as a whole. No one will dispute the influence that Elvis Presley, the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Beyonce, and so on have had on the music scene as a whole. But their music also does not speak for everyone. Personally, I'm not a big Beyonce fan. But I will never tell you that she is not an influential voice of my generation. That's the beauty of music, and the downfall of trying to view it based solely upon its peak popularity and trying to cram it into one specific generation. Because clearly here in Gen X, spanning 15 years, not everyone agrees. For T, Nirvana came too late for them to consider it influential. And while that is extremely valid, it is also not the case for many members of Gen X. T, in her life, could not think of one single Xer that would agree with the viewpoint of Nirvana being a Gen X band. And I immediately thought of a couple. I spoke first with Ryan Anderson, a chef, author, and part-time trivia host, who also happens to be my older brother, born in 1977, and a full-fledged card-carrying member of Gen X, what his thoughts were on the influence of Nirvana on his life in the 90s, as someone who was 17 when the world lost Kurt Cobain. My initial question to him was, as someone who is Gen X and grew up listening to it, meaning the music of Nirvana, are you willing to text your thoughts and let me share them? His initial response was, other than the wiki for Gen X and when Nirvana released records, yeah, I'll think about it. And after some thought, he did reply, and we did also have a face-to-face conversation. But as far as his text to me, here's a Cliff Notes abbreviation of his broad thoughts on the topic. My point was basically that she's an elder Gen Xer and didn't like grunge, so her opinion, which she was entitled to have, was very slanted. For a younger Gen Xer, yes, Nirvana was the voice of my generation, and her point that all Gen Xers she knows is just her peers and doesn't speak for us all. And as such, Ryan wasn't the only one willing to share their opinion with me. One of my favorite subscribers and all-around favorite people, Julie, reached out via email to talk about her thoughts on the influence of Nirvana on her musical listening experience. And while Ryan was coming from a place of diplomacy, one of the things that we love about Julie is her bluntness and her ability to just tell it like it is and call it like she sees it. Her response was, first, this person has no right speaking for Gen X. I was born in 1976, and as defined by numerous places, Gen X is anyone born between 1965 and 1980. I was graduated in 1994, the year Kurt Cobain died. I would also like to note that the fact that she said she didn't know a single Gen Xer who would disagree only implies to me that only one of two things are likely true. Either her circle is very small, or she refuses to associate with people who don't automatically agree with everything she says or believes. Either way, I feel sorry for her, as our lives are so much richer when we can have thoughtful discussions with people who have different points of view and perspectives. Second, although I do not believe that Kurt Cobain was a champion of Gen X, I believe that T either wasn't paying attention or misunderstood what was being stated in the video. Cobain championed many causes during his life, and after a quick Google search, an article published by the BBC in 2017 stated, quote, 6 reasons we still love Kurt Cobain, end quote. The very first one listed said, quote, Kurt was outspoken on gay rights, homophobia, and sexism. He said he wished he'd been gay just to annoy homophobes and often wore dresses to protest against sexism, end quote. Third, although the main body of this comment is completely incomprehensible to me, I can't tell whether she's trying to make our point or just quoting bits and pieces of things you may have said in the video. I would like to point out that Kurt Cobain and Nirvana did have a major impact on much of the music in the 90s, and that just recently my boyfriend, who was a local musician in numerous bands, and I had a discussion before we ever knew about this video, and he mentioned how much he dislikes Kurt Cobain and Nirvana because of the major impact they had on music in the 90s. How they essentially killed some of the bands that he loved because of their popularity. As a dancer in high school, and again in college, I noticed, but didn't dislike the changes in popular music. I enjoy most music and wasn't stuck on a particular genre. Fourth, I would like to again disagree with T. I don't believe that grunge was not accepted, nor short-lived. In fact, after reading this comment about Nirvana, I played some of their music for my 12-year-old son. And he knew some of the songs. I haven't exposed him to this music myself intentionally until yesterday. It must be in movies, television, or video games. My son and I don't have a radio. We don't listen to the oldies station. We use streaming services. So the fact that this music is still known and enjoyed today, 30 years later, by kids and teenagers, must be considered a testament to the impact it had when released. It is still affecting the youth of today. One point that came across with Julie's email that I thought was very important to share was the fact that her boyfriend isn't a fan of Nirvana. Did not appreciate the fact that they were as impactful as they were, because his particular genre of music that he preferred was not grunge. However, here we are today having this conversation with so many people having an opinion on Nirvana. Clearly they've impacted something. Clearly something about that time still resonates today. Positive, negative, either way, Kurt Cobain and Nirvana were a piece of history for those kids growing up in the 90s and the 80s. Technically, Nirvana is an 80s band. Bleach being released at the end of the 80s, the band being formed in 87. They crossed many boundaries with their music, made us think. Whether we loved it or hated it, conversations happened. And those conversations are shaping musicians today. There are several very influential artists working today, creating music, that will say, when asked who their influences are, Nirvana, Dave Grohl, Kurt Cobain. As I said earlier, Generation X spans 15 years, not a small span of time. So it's completely logical and absolutely valid that T may feel that Nirvana wasn't as impactful in her particular life story. But when looking back at all the sources that I referenced in preparing for my video, the most impacted generation when it comes to the grunge movement began by Nirvana is Gen X. I was a 5-year-old little girl when Nirvana was formed, and 7 when their first album was released. And while my older brother's music would influence me by the sheer fact that our rooms were separated by a wall, their music was not written for me or my generation, but with the hope that it would also influence us as we grew, changing the world one song at a time. What influential music is supposed to do when it is successful is to continue to influence music for future generations. And that seems clear that happened for me, for my son, who's 15, for Julie's son. Grunge has not been short-lived. And while it may not have been accepted at the time, its influence is clearly referenced in songs being released today. I spoke with one of the channel's favorite guest stars, and again a favorite person, Frankie Mermaid, who is now 18, and asked for their insights on the music of Nirvana, and if at all, it's influenced his musical tastes. And here's what he had to say.
Hi, I'm Hunter. You may know me as Frankie Mermaid. And I'm 18. I was born in 2003. Nirvana has been a big part of my life for a very long time. I was raised on them and music that was inspired by them and music from that era. And a lot of the artists and bands that I like were inspired by Nirvana, like Pearl Jam, Tori Amos, Lana Del Rey, The Kid himself, Mr. Cudi, Weezer, and Lil Peep, God rest him. Literally, a computer scientist at the University of London made a scientific experiment to determine the best song of all time, the most iconic and influential songs of all time. And number 1 was Smells Like Teen Spirit. So, bottom line, Nirvana has done so much for music and influenced so many people, and they're not going anywhere.
In looking back at my video, T's comment, and the thoughts and opinions of the friends and family that were willing to contribute to this response video, one thing's abundantly clear. We all have our own feelings on things. We all have our own things that speak to us as individuals. Ryan clearly was impacted by Nirvana. Julie understood their influence, but wasn't a big fan of the music. Jeff, her boyfriend, didn't like the music and absolutely felt the impact of their music to the detriment of his own musical tastes. Frankie, when I first approached to talk about this subject, started singing Come As You Are to me and had every word down. Kurt Cobain has been gone from this earth for longer than that child has been alive. So you tell me, was Nirvana an impact? And because of the time frame that it occurred in, it does occur most for those in Generation X feeling that impact in the moment. When referencing Gen X in the Kurt Cobain section of the video, it was based on the fact that at their peak, that younger scale of Gen X were the ones consuming it, buying the records, watching the MTV Unplugged special, tuning in, listening, absorbing, and changing their world for what we hope is the better. We have a long way to go on the things that Kurt was pushing and the things that he was a champion for. Not his music being a champion of the generation, but his viewpoints being a champion for those who felt voiceless, for the unheard, for those who stood up and demanded to be seen as gay, or outside of the scope of what the world believed was okay at the time. It is a beautiful testament that so many people today are able to stand up and demand to be counted and heard. The LGBTQ plus umbrella has grown and evolved. And I think if Kurt were alive today, he'd be proud of all of you. Directly to T, I want to say thank you for giving the video a watch in general. When you're small like I am, every view does count. Every comment matters. And your voice matters too. And while Nirvana may not have made an impact for you personally, and while their music did not reach you, that's absolutely okay. And for you personally, I acknowledge that you do not reference Nirvana as a champion of your generation, because your generation was a very big generation. Like I said, 15 years is a long time. But for those younger Gen Xers, Nirvana's music was the sound of rebellion, the demand for change, the hope for a better tomorrow. We all need to be able to come as we are. And T, I thank you for coming as you are. I'm grateful for your perspective, especially as someone in the generation just after Gen X, just outside of the purview of that peak of being able to feel its influence. I was far too young, but I feel it now. I reference it now. We all need to be able to stand up for what we believe to be our own truths. Whether the music is good or not, Kurt Cobain was unabashedly himself. He refused to be some cog in a mechanism of pumping out songs just for the sake of selling records. Whatever generation you put that in, the message is important and needs to be said. Whether you loved or hated the music of Nirvana, let's talk about music. Let's talk about poetry. Let's talk about books. Let's talk about movies. Let's talk about the things that get us talking, that get us thinking, that get us off our feet ready to change the world. For the younger scope of Gen X, that was Nirvana. For the older scope of Gen X, maybe not so much. But that is the beauty of music. There is something for everyone. I would love for T to reply with some of her favorite music from growing up, the music that did shape her. And I will gladly do a video talking about their impact on current music, on how they've changed things and shaped things. Because that's what happens to the music that remains. The bands we talk about, the artists we remember, they don't go away. They remain a very important part of our past, our present, and our future. This is a debate that probably will have no end anytime soon, because music can be a very personal thing. A favorite quote of mine says, "When you're happy, you listen to the music. And when you're sad, you understand the lyrics." There are so many songs that you can hear and you immediately remember the first time you heard it. That visceral reaction of falling in love with a song in the same ways sometimes that we fall in love with other people. They're recollections of times that we endured, times that we've cherished, and the hope for what can come. Thank you, T, for your insights. Thank you, Ryan, Julie, Jeff, and Frankie for contributing your thoughts on the subject as well. For those of you that are interested, I will link the 27 Club video below so you can take a look for yourselves. It's an hour, but it's an important hour. Music goes back as far-reaching as our memories, all the way back to biblical times. Music is important and valid, and whoever your favorite artist is, they're important and valid, and so are all of you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and please comment below some of your favorite artists. I'd love to have a channel playlist of all of our favorite songs, because I guarantee you it would be pretty eclectic and probably really cool. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you for being here, and for each of you for taking the time to listen to me rambling. Until the next video, have a good night.